Hi everyone, my name's Darryl Panes, CEO of As Good as Gold Australia, and this evening once again I'm joined by my brother Brian.
Thank you, Darryl.
Partner at As Good as Gold. And this evening we interview Alasdair Macleod, advisor to As Good as Gold Australia. Good evening, Alasdair.
Good evening to you.
And good evening to you.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something else then, Alasdair, but you caught me out. Look,
nice to be with you.
Yes.
Nice to be with you anyway.
Yes. This evening, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I've got to say, Alasdair, the world's economy is an absolute mess. And there's, it's not just me who's saying that. JP Morgan CEO, of course, Jamie Dimon, says there is a hurricane coming to the US economy and one needs to brace themselves right now. Janet Yellen has also acknowledged that she was wrong, dreadfully wrong, with her assessment on inflation. So it's clear to me at the moment the Fed has its back to the wall and is absolutely out of bullets. Now, with unprecedented levels of debt and inflation surging, one would suggest that it's the perfect economic environment for gold. In a recent talk, you mentioned that people were flocking to the US dollar for safety, but with the vast amount of dollars that have been printed, which brings about a loss in the value of the US dollar, many people are now asking, why has the gold price remained stationary? Everyone expects that gold should have surged by now. Exactly. Now, I'd like to know your response to that, Alasdair, because I know, I've got a very strong feeling I know what you're going to say, and I'm looking forward to your answer. So, and then what will be the catalyst that will set off the gold price?
There are several very interesting points which you raise in your question. The first thing I want to say, which before I come on to gold, is what Jamie Dimon said. You quoted just the first part of what he said, but actually what he did was he went on to say that JP Morgan will be very cautious in its policies. So what we have is the most senior American commercial banker effectively warning us that there is going to be no further growth in bank credit, possibly even contraction in bank credit. Now, this is the, if you like, the nightmare of central bankers who, ever since Irving Fisher described the relationship between bank collateral and bank credit in a bear market, they don't want to see this happen at all. So this warning, I think we have to assume that it's going to be followed through. You're going to find contracting bank credit. You will therefore find that there will be a soft peddling of the new policies about tightening on interest rates, tightening on QT and all that sort of stuff. I think that might be amended a little bit. They're still talking about transient inflation, but I don't know if you've noticed this, but the American Fed sort of backed off that statement when it was absolutely ridiculed. But actually, what they're still now saying is it's still going to come back to 2%. It's just going to take a little bit longer. So this is interesting. So the first thing I would say is that Jamie Dimon's statement about the future lending policy, I think, was probably the most important part of that. The American commercial banking world is now battening down the hatches. And that is something that we've got to take into account going forward from here. Now, with respect to gold, the value of gold, the fact of the matter is that after, 50 years from 1971, 51 years, from 1971 to date, the Keynesians have basically ruled the roost when it comes to talking about money. They don't understand money. They don't know what money legally is. And so consequently, the level of exposure to gold is extremely low. And people just don't understand what gold really is. And that, if you like, is a situation which has been exploited by the bullion banks, who understand that only one thing, and that is that gold has no counterparty risk, and therefore it is a superior asset for collateral purposes. And it allows them to wheel and deal in paper gold on the back of that. And they are always on the short side. They have now been caught on the hop somewhat and are trying desperately to retrieve their shorts. And what that involves is sending signals out to the market that gold is going lower. Don't buy any gold. Forget gold. Sell your gold to us. We will take it for you. Paper gold, And this is really what's going on with gold at the moment. But if you go back to Roman law, it was clearly stated at the time that money was metallic, and it was the only thing that qualifies as money. Everything else is currency or credit. And this is, written in Roman law and has been adopted. It continued throughout the continent. Now, in Britain, the Romans left before Justinian codified all this, so we didn't actually have this in our common law. But in 1875, when they put together the courts of chancery and common law, at that stage, the practice of understanding that true money was gold, coin, and nothing else, that then became law in Britain. And given Britain's empire in the second half of that century, it effectively became the standard not just for Europe, but for the whole world as well. So that's where we are. I mean, we're talking about legal money, which the Keynesians are trying to deny, but they're trying to deny the law, which is nonsense. And it must be a source of great embarrassment to the Keynesians that central banks, which are notionally in their ideological camp, retain gold reserves and are extremely reluctant to make them available to their own populations through the currency, which you would have thought, if people are stupid enough to want this pet rock, then we'll let them exchange money for it. No, they don't. Why? And they certainly are very reluctant to offer gold as a means of exchange, if you like, to other central banks for other currencies. So, where are the Keynesians? I think they speak with forked tongue on this. And this is part of the whole corruption, if you like, of the fiat money system that is now coming to some sort of halt. And what that halt is, I'm sure, will come out in the course of this conversation.
Mm-hmm. So what's going to be the catalyst, really?
Well, it's interesting. We have at the moment a debate developing between, is it inflation or are we going for a recession? As far as the Keynesians are concerned, it's a black and white. You're either, if you've got a recession, then in prospect, then you've got to just stimulate the economy. So, but they've just given up all understanding of the role of money in the economy. The monetarists claim that they know what's going on with money, hence the term monetarism. But they work effectively off a mathematical formula called the equation of exchange, which involves the quantity of money, the velocity of its circulation, the prices, and the number of transactions, which are broadly, if you like, summed up in GDP. But this actually has got nothing to do with the reality of the situation. The value of currency doesn't work off a mathematical formula. It actually works off how people see it and how they want to use it. And in that context, it's interesting to note that the level of personal liquidity, all the vibes I get, the level of personal liquidity and liquidity in business balance sheets and in the financial sector is large. It is higher probably than it has ever been. I'm talking about the money which one holds into reserve to spend at a later date. And the level is uncomfortable. And consequently, we're beginning to see people trying to get rid of it. I mean, the first sign of this was when we came out of lockdowns, when people had been unable to spend. What do? They started chasing prices of secondhand cars up through the roof, and they're still above the price of new vehicles. I mean, it's just crazy. What you have is a developing situation of people trying to dump money for goods. Now, this back in 1923 was termed the crack-up boom. Basically, the only benefit to the economy of this collapsing currency was that everybody wanted to get rid of it, so they rushed out to buy what they could, while they could, and that's the crack-up boom. And it's the point where people begin to understand that actually this money is never going to recover. I mean, the idea that the Deutschmark, the paper mark in those days, might recover was the sort of firm belief in the foreign exchanges from time to time, and also from the people. And the people in Germany really they finally gave up hope in around about April to May 1923. And at that stage, they threw in the towel on the paper mark. And the paper mark rapidly descended into complete worthlessness. We have a slightly different situation today because we're starting from a point where everybody has got this liquidity up to their necks. I'm talking about currency, but mainly bank deposits. If you look at the total of bank deposits as measured by M2 in America, it's $21 trillion. That is against a GDP of around about $22 trillion. I mean, it's almost one for one. This is crazy, absolutely crazy. And it's the reason why the Fed has outstanding reverse repos of around about $2 trillion, which is roughly 9% of that total of 21 trillion. Why do they have this? They have this. The point about a reverse repo is it takes in unwanted currency from circulation. In other words, people don't want $2 trillion. And that amount is likely to start building if you find that interest rates continue to rise. Why? Because you're getting paid sweet FA on your deposit account. Why should you hold dollars on a bank deposit account when you're getting paid almost nothing for it and prices are rising at a 9% clip? Why should you hold on to dollars when we already see that the Fed's balance sheet is in negative equity? They have just declared that they have got losses, unrealized losses on all their QE acquired bonds of $380 billion. I looked at the balance sheet yesterday, and the total equity, including undistributed income to the U.S. Treasury, stands at 50 billion. So, 380 wipes out 50. Now, they do have a gold note on their balance sheet, which if they revalue to the current level, which they would need the permission from the US Treasury to do, and I don't know the exact terms of that gold note, that would restore the balance sheet. But if you get a further fall in bond prices, that would get wiped out very, very quickly. So, why should we be holding on to the highest level of deposit liquidity that we've ever seen? This is a dangerous situation. And then you've got, America is one thing, but and the banks there aren't horrendously overgeared. They're sort of like 11 times asset to equity. But go to Japan, over 20 times. Go to the Eurozone, over 20 times. And if you look at the share prices of the Eurozone banks, the global systemically important banks, they're all standing at huge great discounts to their balance sheet equity value. So in other words, the underbook value. Why are they underbook value? It's not because they're a good bargain. It's because people understand there is huge risk in these banks. So why, as a depositor, should you be holding deposits? Well, if you're a small depositor, you're probably relying on the government to underwrite the deposits. In the case of the Eurozone, I think something like 100,000 euros or something like that. Here we've got 85,000 pounds. So, if the bank goes belly up, then, we get bailed out by the government. But if you're a large depositor, do you really want this situation? Do you really want to have this risk? If, let's say, you've sold your house and you have got your money in your client's your solicitor's client account, I mean, that's not covered. That goes bang. You lost the proceeds of your house. I mean, this is a situation which is rapidly deteriorating, and it is deteriorating the more we see pressure for interest rates to rise. And what the central banks are trying to do is they're trying to convince us that this inflation thing is temporary and we're going to return back to 2%. Therefore, we don't need to put up interest rates other than just by a tiny bit. This is, I can tell you, a very dangerous situation. It is rapidly descending into something which we may have seen the beginning of, and that is a crack-up boom. And that crack-up boom basically means that the value of the currencies just evaporates. There's no other word for it. No. We've been talking about this. I've mentioned the John Law experience back in France. When you get a situation where the central bank decides that it's got to support the assets, the financial assets in the system, which basically will be the policy of the Fed as it tries to not raise interest rates, then you kill the currency. And that's really the prospect of what we see.
What we're saying is when all else fails, everyone rushes to gold. That's really what...
They've got to re-educate themselves, Darryl, because we've forgotten what true money is. I mean, I've told you the legal situation, but nobody understands that really, except lawyers who specialize in banking. But this is not in general circulation, and economists, they say, oh, it's a pet rock. It's not. It is legally money. Not, currency isn't even legally money. So it's a substitute for money. And this is the amount of re-education that everybody's got to go through very, very quickly. I think is going to take gold from where it is to a far higher level, not because gold is going up, but because currency is collapsing. And that's key to understanding what's actually going on. This is not an inflation thing, which, because the Russians are screwing up the food supply, the world food supplies and all the rest of it, it means that prices are going to rise. No, forget it. It's not to do with that at all. It's to do with the purchasing power of currencies collapsing. That is actually what we're talking about. And to actually deem it as inflation is in that sense very much a misnomer and misleading. And I think this is a very important point which people have got to understand.
It's scary. It's an absolute lack of education, isn't it, really?
Absolutely.
Lack of understanding.
Everybody does 10 years or 12 years of education, and then they go on to university, but they're all taught on the same wave level. The economists of John Maynard Keynes. And it's a complete failure. Yeah. Alasdair, we'll move on. Wow. We did mention about Russia. That will be a second question I bring up. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about cryptocurrencies. I'm going to let the audience know that I don't own any, right? Never have and never will, all right? And because I have a belief that it is a fiat currency anyway. It has come from nothing. There's no backing of it. It's just a thought up idea. But I want your comments. I'd like to know more about cryptocurrencies, Alasdair. Bitcoin At the highest peak, from what I can see, it was around about $70,000 for a coin, now falling to around $29,000 to $30,000. Well, that is over half, over 50%, and there's no way that appeals to me. All right? But this appears to be, to me, unstable. Now, could government intervene and make cryptocurrencies unlawful? For example, introduce Roman law. What's your feeling?
I mean, your mention of Roman law, I think, is actually the underlying point. Let me explain it just a little bit more. Money and currency, in other words, money substitutes, have a different position in criminal law than other property. And what this means is that if, let us say, someone steals a possession from me, and I happen to find out where it has gone, even though it might have passed through a number of hands, if I can establish that that was my property, then I can reclaim that. And there is no compensation involved, even though the person who last acquired it, who I have identified now thinks he possesses it, did so in good faith. It still remains my property. And indeed, this is the background to what's been going on ever since the Second World War, with Jewish families recovering their art, paintings, whatever, what their possessions, which were taken off them by the Nazis. So it's very important to understand that money has a specific legal status in criminal law, whereby if stolen money or currency changes hands and it ends up in the hands of someone who was not involved with the theft of that property, currency, gold, whatever it might be, and received it in good faith, it cannot be reclaimed by the original owner. It cannot be reclaimed. Now, so where does this leave cryptocurrencies? Cryptocurrencies can be reclaimed because they have exactly the same legal status as a work of art, as anything which is not money. So that can be reclaimed. Now, you could say that, well, good luck to the government establishing that your Bitcoin, at an earlier stage in its existence, were the proceeds of crime. I agree. It could be very difficult for the government to establish it, but it's not going to necessarily stop them trying, and it disqualifies cryptocurrencies as acting as currency. Of that, it is absolutely clear. The governments, with their lawyers, will be advised of this basic law, which exists in English law, exists around the world, had its origin in Roman law, and they will frame their regulations. They will look at the future of the cryptocurrencies and as to whether they want to get involved, very much on that basis. Now, there is a sub-story in this, and that is that you have got the technology, which is extremely interesting to governments. That is certainly true. Blockchain technology and so on and so forth. And they are talking, I think it's almost a defensive move in a sense. They're talking about introducing their own central bank digital currencies as some sort of way of satisfying the demand for a cryptocurrency. And it's turned into a sort of control freakery thing whereby, this is actually quite a good idea because we can use a central bank digital currency to target, sort of various industries to, sort of make sure that our stimulus works. And we can also cut people out if they think they're wrong-uns, they won't get the digital currency. So you've got all this sort of stuff. And it's the exchange of information, the information that will be given to central banks is absolutely massive. They will be able to pry into our transactions in a way we have never seen before. But anyway, putting that to one side, I think when it comes to the cryptocurrencies, the way they have performed is that they have fallen along with the high-tech companies. They've tracked them almost, this year completely. I saw charts on Twitter of 3 or 4 of the major sort of what they call fangs, sort of the Google, or is it Alphabet, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely in line with what's been going on in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so on. If we get a situation where they go down much further, then I think governments are going to be tempted to blow the whistle on cryptocurrencies. They couldn't do that at the top of the market because that would be too contentious. But we're rapidly getting into a situation where governments can start claiming that they need to intervene to stop their citizens being sucked into something where they're going to be losing huge amounts of money. They need to protect their citizens. I mean, this is the sort of thing politicians talk about. So I can imagine them doing it on this one. I have traded Bitcoin in the past, and I'm glad to say very successfully. I got out far too early, but that's the nature of things. I'm glad I don't have them now. I've learned a lot, and I think also that the stable coins upon which these which is the basis in which these things have traded, they also impart an extra risk as well. I mean, if you look at the assets backing Tether, there are some cryptocurrencies in there, I think less than 10%, but also the backing very much is commercial and US Treasury bonds, which in an environment of rising interest rates means that their values fall. So, that's no longer, the buck there basically will be broken. And I think this is something which is a potential scandal. They have refused to actually say what the backing is, only just give a sort of broad brush statement. Their figures are not audited. They refuse to audit them. I mean, I would have thought the easiest way to dispel any criticism is to audit, say, right, okay, we call Pete Marwick or KPMG in, they've looked at all the assets, and this is what they say, and that's what we've got. And that's our liabilities. It's easy to do. So you have to ask yourself the question, why don't they do it? And I leave that one hanging in the air.
Oh dear. Well, I'm glad you brought. I listened to that, and it emphasises to me, Darryl, I'm staying away from crypto. Totally. Moving on. I did mention that we all mentioned Russia a few minutes ago. And the sanctions that are being applied to Russia right now, to me, is ludicrous, because I'm seeing that they're not working. I mean, I've seen that countries like Japan and India, they need these commodities that Russia produces, right? And so they're bypassing. They are bypassing, and all these Russian sanctions. So it's not darn well working. What do you think? I just cannot imagine that Russia is supplying all these minerals. I've said it before. You dig them out of the ground. There aren't any more to dig out of the ground once it's gone, right? They provide the timber, right, and it takes 30 years for a new tree to grow, right? And the bottom line is that the Russian ruble, or the Russian president Putin, has said, no, I want to be paid in rubles. I don't want to be paid in US dollars. I want to be paid in rubles or gold. And the Russian ruble has gone from about 128 at the peak down to 62 at the moment. What are your thoughts, Alasdair?
Well, there are several elements to this. I mean, there's the geopolitical element. And the way I would sum it up is that President Putin obviously had a strategy, a financial strategy. And I've always viewed this as a financial war rather than a physical war on the ground. Yeah. To my mind, what's going on in the Ukraine is actually a sideshow. The main thing is that what he's doing with the ruble, and he's doing something which Western economists just don't understand, because they're Keynesian. As far as they're concerned, you need a continually weakening currency in order for your economy to grow. Right, okay. What Putin is saying is, no, that's not right. If we have a stronger ruble, then it means that our people will be more wealthy as a result. And he's got a substantial export surplus because of all the commodities, oil, energy. I mean, they're the largest exporters of energy in the world. Third largest in oil, but if you take in the gas and all the rest of it, then and coal, you're looking at the largest. We have a situation where the West is misreading this very, very badly. I mean, I continually see newspaper articles in the business section of our press saying that the Russian economy is suffering. No, it's not. It's not suffering at all.
No.
I mean, you've got an economy with a lot of corruption, but it's, I can't remember. I think something like 13% is the flat rate of income tax.
That's correct.
The amazing thing is that the situation, the economic situation in Russia is actually very similar in terms of free markets and all the rest of it to the situation in America in the 1920s. That was booming. You had the corruption because you had the mafia and all the rest of it, which was accelerated with the bootlegging thing and so on. You got a Russian mafia. There is corruption, and that is a break on everything. But if you look at the actual situation, people get on with their lives, and as long as they don't, try and interfere with the politics, they can make what they want for themselves, which, is the way it should be. So the underlying economy actually is a lot stronger than our press would actually think. The rubles for oil situation was a very, very astute move. And as you pointed out, it's pushed the ruble up, which in terms of numbers is the reverse of up. It's gone from the actual weakest point was 150 rubles to the dollar.
All right. Okay.
And recent days, I think earlier this week or last week, we saw it down at a little bit below 60. And as you rightly say, it's about 61 at the time of this broadcast. So this has come about because Putin has said that the unfriendlies, as he calls them, which are basically members of NATO and their allies, so it's NATO plus Japan plus Korea, South Korea, and no one else, incidentally, will have to buy rubles in order to take delivery of gas, oil, whatever. In fact, I think pretty much everything. And it's driving up the ruble. But one thing that's interesting is that by doing this, he's effectively commoditizing the currency. Now, this is important because we see a situation where in the West, our currencies are on the verge of collapsing. He's commoditizing his to protect the ruble from what he sees as a destabilizing situation in the Western financial system, which could well lead to the complete collapse of the currencies.
Yeah.
Furthermore, if you look at what they're planning to do with the Central Asian states, I think it's called the Eurasian economic area. We've got members of all the stans, sort of Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and all these guys, and Belarus, and the various associated other peoples with them. But what they're doing is they're producing a centralized currency for trading purposes. And this presumably, I mean, we don't have the plans yet, but we've had various leaks of information which give us some guidance. It seems that they're going to take a basket of about 20 commodities, and what they will do is they will fix it presumably on a daily basis against the local currencies, so that the Belarusian currency and the Tajikan currency, I mean, God knows what they are, I really don't know. But they will be fixed against them so that when it comes to trading, so that let's say Tajikistan sells some raw materials to Belarus, it will be done at a price not in their own currencies, but in this currency, which will be agreed between them. So, and that is going to be extended to Russia, China, India, Pakistan, and even the BRICS countries are talking about joining into this sort of arrangement. And not only that, but various Middle Eastern countries, oil exporting countries, are now talking about this is of interest to us. So, what this is telling me is that at the national level, outside the cadre, if you like, of the Fed, the Bank of England, the ECB, the Bank of Japan, and the Swiss National Bank, and Uncle Tom Cobley and all in the unfriendlies, they're beginning to say, hold on a minute, this is actually a very risky situation, and we need to protect our currencies. We need to protect ourselves. Mm-hmm. And they're doing this in various ways. I mean, some, like the Czech Republic, are now saying we want to increase our gold reserves to what we had before, which is 100 tons of gold. That's our initial target. Fine, brilliant. You've got, sort of oil exporting nations looking at this with great interest and thinking that our future actually is with the Eurasian continent rather than the rest of the world. I'll tell you something else too. Way back in 2014, I interviewed for GoldMoney. It was something that wasn't actually released. I interviewed a director of one of the major Swiss refineries. This was 2014. And they were working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And a lot of what they were doing was taking in gold bars, 400-ounce LBMA standard gold bars from the Middle East, re-refining them into the Chinese 4/9 1 kilo standard, and then shipping them back to the owners in the Middle East. And you ask yourself, why? The thing that's fascinating is that you can only come to one conclusion. Even back in 2014, these, if you like, very wealthy Arabs, Arab states, whatever, recognized that the future is not the dollar and the petrodollar in America, but the future is actually what's going on in Asia, Eurasia. That is fascinating. That is now coming to pass. And Eurasia is protecting itself from the follies of the West. So that, to answer your question, it's a very long-winded answer, I know. It's a speech on its own, but it is a very important topic. It is being misrepresented, I think, in our press. They don't understand what's going on. They think it's a war against Ukraine and we just got to hammer and beat the bastards. Hopefully Putin is ill and he's going to die, or, whatever the story is. But the reality of the situation is that Putin is winning the financial war. And by that, I mean he is protecting his nation from the follies, the financial follies of the West. And these sanctions have basically just made the whole situation far, far worse for the West. And Putin is sitting there saying, well, you got the problem, not me. Meanwhile, oil is going up. You've got respectable oil people saying it won't be, this is worse than the oil crisis in the early 1970s. They're talking about it going to $300 a barrel. Fine. I don't know where it'll go, but the one thing I feel absolutely certain is that with all the printing of money that's going on, or currency and credit rather, there is no doubt that the follies of the West are going to drive, in fiat currency terms, the price of commodities far, far higher. And the price in gold will just go, along with the commodities like that, as they have ever since Roman times.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking earlier about Diocletian, who in around about 200, 210, 220 AD, something like that, had a massive inflation problem, what we would call an inflation problem, but actually it was a collapse in the purchasing power of the denarius. And he tried to counter this by putting in an edict of maximum prices. And the fascinating thing is that he also, very conveniently from my point of view, including a maximum price for gold and a maximum price for silver, which incidentally put the gold-silver ratio at a ratio of 12. So that's of interest to us, with it at the moment at 84. My screen. the prices of, for everything from slaves, different categories of slaves, to food, to clothing, to, carts, to horses, livestock, the whole thing was all there. And apart from slaves, for which we don't have a price nowadays, thank goodness, I think that most of those prices are contained in a band, either double or half, measured in gold from that edict of maximum prices, compared with the prices today. So the purchasing power of gold has just quietly swum along on an even keel over the last 2 millennia. And I expect that to continue to happen through the gathering crisis, which is going to, I think, increasingly, I can't see how fiat currencies can survive beyond this year. I really don't. It's very, very concerning.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, there's a point here that Darryl will understand this when I mention it. But just before I do, we mentioned China, India, and the Arab nations. All right. So look at China. They don't sell any of their own gold. They are the largest producer of gold or mining of gold. I think it's something like 380 tons or 400 tons per year, has been for 10 years. They don't sell any of it. They keep it all in their own country. India, massive population, and they're a massive importer of gold, right? Because the people don't trust their Indian currency, so they just import gold, right? Now the Arabs, interesting. Now, I know this may be a little bit outside of the range of what we're talking about, but I remember the film Ben-Hur, the original Ben-Hur, and the chariot race. And before that chariot race, the Arab leader would come. He came along with his 2 big thugs with a big war chest, right? That's remember?
Remember it well.
And he put a cane, a stick, a sword, or whatever, and he goes, and it was all precious metal. Maybe a few opals and whatever, but it was all
pretty much gold to the bottom.
Pretty much gold to the bottom. He didn't poke his sword through US dollars or rupiah or Japanese yen. No, it was gold and silver and maybe a few stones, so opal stones.
The only thing that counted, the only thing that represented value.
Only thing that represented value. Yeah, it just goes back so many years. Yeah. Small question. China has shut down Beijing and Shanghai for a number of months now. Now, we've all been told it's to make sure this COVID, third lot or fourth lot of COVID doesn't expand. But my question here is, Alasdair, could there be an economic reason for this, or is it just COVID? Will the price of silver come back with a vengeance when China opens up again? Is there more to it than just the virus?
We don't know the answer. I believe in the incompetence of the state in China, that's for sure. So I don't rule out incompetence. Equally, when you see what's going on with the whole of the situation in Asia, it could be that it's an attempt to destabilize the West through supply chains. And bear in mind that on the one hand, you've got Russia, which is the major exporter of the West's commodities, and you've got China, which is the major exporter of the West's goods. So, between them, they've actually got a vice-like grip on us if they want to work it that way. Yeah. I don't know they are working it that way. It just seems to me it's been absolutely crazy locking down Shanghai. But you've got the bureaucratic mind to deal with. So I'm inclined to think it's the bureaucratic mind that's actually doing this rather than, a desire, if you like, to make our lives even more difficult. Apart from anything else, it's very, very bad for the businesses in China. And I can't see that will be a deliberate act of policy.
Okay. Darryl?
Yeah. Alasdair, this was just, I'm interested in your comments here. I'm always interested in your comments, but the mere fact that cruise ships are about to re-enter the water all around the world, I started to think about that. And it led me to think back about how governments actually are selling us at the moment on how quickly we can respond to the economy that we've been experiencing over the last couple of years. They give the impression that we can respond quickly, that the economy, business, life in general, we're hurting 1 minute, but everything will be okay tomorrow. And so then I started looking at cruise ships. We're about to see them embarking again. And I thought about that for a minute. And I looked at the Royal Caribbean, did a little bit of research there, and found out that they'd borrowed something like $3.5 billion. That's with a B, not with an M, right? $3.5 billion to stay afloat while their shares had dropped, say, something like 80%. This was at the start of the pandemic. And whether they were beneficiaries of a true $2 trillion bailout or not, I'm not sure. They may have been included in that package along with a number of the other ships at sea, or at dock, I should say. But there's just been a massive amount of money that's been printed and made available, not just to cruise ships, of course, but millions of businesses all around the world. A lot of these would not have survived had they not been provided with incentive packages to stay afloat. And many of them, of course, have failed anyway. But I thought about all of this and I thought, if it was so easy, Brian and I have been in business for many years. We're in manufacturing for 30 years. If you'd have shut down our company for 2 years through that pandemic, we would not have survived. You just can't come back tomorrow and represent yourself and think everything's going to be okay. Where is your labour force? And if you were part of a subsidy package, then where did that money come from? Well, we know that governments have got huge printing presses. We understand that. But at the end of the day, there is a payday. One has to pay back this level of debt. And so my question to you was, and I get back to Jamie Dimon's comment really, there's a hurricane coming. And there most certainly is, because if it was so easy, none of us would have to work anymore. Why do we set up factories? Why do we have cruise ships? Why do we manufacture anything? All we really need to do is have a printing press, crank this damn thing up, and just keep paying us for doing nothing. Now, it doesn't work. We know that. Competition comes into it. Production comes into it. How long can this facade continue, in your opinion?
Well, the answer is that for not very much longer, simply because interest rates are rising and the money was, as you say, a lot of it has been borrowed, which means it's got to be paid back. But before it's paid back, it's got to, there's an interest cost. And as interest rates rise, then the insolvencies, I think, are going to just rocket. I mean, it's inevitable. I mean, there is, I think, another point in this, and that is that the headlines are filled with the problems from lockdown for large companies. Never really about what goes on in 80% of everyone's economy, which is the small and medium-sized businesses. But if you go out, go out of the major conurbations, go into the, sort of towns and things like that, and see, how many businesses have had to shut down, and nobody's actually gone in there, or all you've got is a charity shop set up where the old business went bust. I mean, this is everywhere. It is everywhere, and the idea that we just return to normal, I mean, it's complete nonsense. I mean, what happened was, one way to understand this is that economies always evolve. They evolve the whole time. Everything changes all the time. Businesses come and go. What we want yesterday is different from what we want tomorrow, and so on. So the whole thing just is a sort of rolling evolution the whole time. Now, if you say, the government turns around and says, right, stop. and then 6 months later it says reopen, and thinks that there's going to be no change at all and things just continue, forget it, because that's not the reality of the situation.
No, it's not.
And and so you get all these sort of problems. I mean, like supply chains and people who have got used to not working, they don't want to go back, they've taken early retirement, whatever. So you've got labor shortages, and people are in the wrong place. The whole thing is just a complete mess, and it takes time to sort out. When governments get involved, it takes even longer to sort out. I mean, we've got, you were mentioning cruise ships. Yeah. Okay, let's talk airlines here. I mean, we've got airlines like EasyJet and TUI and so on, and these basically are sort of take people on holiday. They're cheapo airlines. They are having to cancel huge numbers of flights. Why? Because they haven't got the pilots. Why haven't they got the pilots? Well, some of the more experienced guys will say, well, to hell with it, I'm not going back to work. I'm going to take early retirement. And the younger pilots have been out of it so long, they have to retrain to get the license to fly again. So, and why is that? It's because of government regulation as to, how pilots qualify. I'm not saying that the regulations are wrong, but all I'm saying is that if it was up to EasyJet to sort itself out without all this government regulation, it would do it in a fraction of the time that it can do it, given that it's got to comply with all these regulations, many of which are completely useless. I mean, I've just returned from Greece, and we were very lucky. But when I got back from Greece, picked up the car at something like 11 o'clock at night. I mean, it's quite late. This was Bristol Airport, minor airport. The car park place where you pick up your keys was absolutely stuffed full of people. And it turned out that they were meant to be on a flight which was cancelled. So they were coming back to try and collect their cars. And you think, oh, my God, this is a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. And you've got people who feel that the only way they can get on holiday is to turn up at the airport 5 hours early and pray. This is a complete nonsense, Darryl. Words fail me, actually, the way this has been screwed up.
As it does.
And it is something that is, I mean, okay, you've got the airlines and the cruise ships are in the headlines, but so much of this mess is not in the headlines. And it is far, far worse. And it's being made worse by government stopping the situation resolving itself. It's very, very sad. And rising interest rates, I think, getting back to your fundamental question, rising interest rates, I think, will hit us very, very hard, far harder than they would otherwise, because of all the debt that has been taken on in order for people just to survive. This is debt which, under other circumstances, they would be advised by the accountants, look, you're far better to call in the receivers, because you are trading illegally and this is becoming a criminal act if you're not very careful, sort of thing. But no, all that was suspended.
Alasdair, final question for today. Of course, there'll be many in the future, of course. But gentleman by the name of Ray Dalio. Most of our viewers, of course, would have heard of Ray Dalio. I'd like to think they had.
We talk about him often.
Yeah, the gentleman's worth 18.4 billion, awful lot of money. He says this: everyone should consider 5 to 10% allocation to gold as a hedge. If you do have an excellent analysis of why you shouldn't have such an allocation to gold, we'd appreciate you sharing it with us. What an awkward position to be in to respond to that. Look, the last 20 years, gold's been spectacular. I think I've been in gold for nearly 25 years, and it's been spectacular for me and for Brian. I think the next 20 years is going to be even more spectacular. How do you respond to Ray Dalio's comments? And how important is it going to be to own gold over the next 20 years?
Well, firstly, I can't come up with a reason why you shouldn't hold gold. But one thing I would say, looking at the gold price over a long period of time, is it's not gold going up; it's actually paper currencies going down. And the evidence of this is the price of commodities measured in gold. The price of commodities measured in gold fluctuates, yes. But if you look at the price of oil measured in gold grams, then it has, since 1950, it has fallen by around about 25%. That's all. And I think at the worst, it doubled, and probably at the worst, it halved. So, it moved in a relatively reasonable range. If, on the other hand, you measure oil in paper currencies, I mean, you look at the sterling and the dollar and the euro, it's quite clear that the fluctuations in the price, I mean, the dollar price has been it started at $2.57 back in the early 50s. I think it hit a high of something like $143 at one stage. And then it actually went negative. Do you remember I think it was April 2020 because of a delivery problem. So, I mean, that was a slightly freaky situation. And now if I look at WTI on my screen, it's currently 112, having been about 120. And it's just been weak over the last few days. And one suspects it's been intervened with a bit. But you can see that the volatility is actually when it's priced in paper currencies, not in gold. So the way I think to look at the gold price going forward from here is, I think the only assumption you can make is that when it comes to buying real things like the commodities that we actually need, like energy, food, and so on and so forth, priced in gold, and this is why I mentioned Diocletian going all the way back, if there's a continuation of that argument, then these will remain sort of relatively constant. I mean, there can be anything between twice this level or half this level or whatever, but that is not very much variation compared with what happens with paper currencies. I now very, very firmly expect to see a collapse in the purchasing power of paper currencies. We talked earlier about the crack-up boom and what drives it. It is just too much liquidity in everyone's hands in a time of increased systemic, financial, systemic, and currency risk. And I think you're beginning to see people trying to get out of currencies, which is a very difficult thing to do, because if you may get rid of your bank deposit, go and buy a, dare I say, Darryl, a Jaguar E-Type at current prices.
Right.
Somebody else, like the seller of the Jaguar E-Type, has, he's then got the currency of the bank deposit. So it doesn't get destroyed. Now, if that guy thinks I don't actually want currency, then at the margin, what he's going to do is he's going to only sell his E-Type for a higher price, because the price has got to rise to the level where he actually wants to have currency and is prepared to exchange it for currency. So this is actually what's been going on with with car prices. I don't know what it's been like in Australia, but in this country, I mean, it's just absolutely crazy. We sold a car for something like £5,000 more than we paid for it. That's so long ago. But that was after 2 years. 2 years of motoring. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But this, to my mind, is signs of people beginning to understand what is happening to currency, and they're up to the necks in it, and they don't want to be up to the necks in it. So what I would see, therefore, is I would see gold moving sideways, give or take, continuing, but paper currency going through the floor. Now, the extent to which the paper currency goes through the floor obviously sets the future price in that paper currency of gold. And, the way I feel, I mean, I'm not prepared to part with my gold coins at anything like the current price. I can't see me parting with them at all, because to me it is money. I will only part with them as a last resort. And I expect to be able to use them to buy assets at what might appear very, very ambitious terms today. But given that all assets are priced in paper currency, and given that the collapse of a paper currency brings about huge hardship on everybody, they will need to sell assets. Now, if you think about a house in Australia, which might be $1 million, sort of, relatively reasonable but modest house. For all I know, if I'm right about what's happening, by the end of this year, that might be $10 million. But equally, in terms of gold, the price will be considerably less in gold grams. Now, where that leaves the Australian dollar measured in gold grams, I haven't a clue. But I think that there is only one thing to hold in these very, very dangerous circumstances, and that is to hold something which has nothing to do with the fiat currency system. And you want something which is legally money. So that leaves us with metallic money, which is gold and silver. I don't know what the price is going to be. I don't actually care, because what it's about is the collapse of paper currencies, not the rise in the price of gold. So obviously, there's going to be a huge shortage of gold circulating as money and silver circulating as money under these circumstances. Huge, huge shortage. So you'll see their purchasing power rise in their own right. But the real story is the collapse of purchasing power of the paper currencies. Yeah. And I think this is a very, very important point. People think about inflation as simply increasing prices. It's not that. They think about it as the extra amount of currency in circulation. Yes, it is that. But the important thing is the effect, and that is the debasement of the currency. Yeah. That is really what we're talking about. And it's something that could happen very, very rapidly if, and I hope this is not true, if we end up moving rapidly into a crack-up boom as a result of a collapse of the global financial and currency system.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I can't be more specific.
Good explanation.
Absolutely. No, gold has been a valuable asset now for, well, at least 5,000 years. Historically, we can go back that far and confirm that. I think it'll survive another 5,000 years. No other fiat currency.
They all go to zero.
They all go to zero. Yeah. 3,800 of them, all gone to zero. I'll back gold every single time.
Anybody who thinks that the US dollar or the Australian dollar, the English pound is going to continue hasn't got his head screwed on, because they have all failed in history.
Yeah.
So they can continue, but only as gold substitutes. In other words, in other words, if I can exchange my pound notes for gold on whatever the terms are, but that is guaranteed that I can do that, then they will continue to survive. That is the condition that is required.
Yeah. Alasdair, thank you so much once again. What you do for As Good as Gold Australia is very much appreciated. We continue to look forward to your contribution over the months and years ahead. So I guess, and to our subscribers, of course, we thank you so much for supporting this channel. I really appreciate it. And until next time, stay well, stay focused, and goodbye for now.
And goodbye for now.